Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Let not your heart be troubled. His tender word I hear, and resting on His goodness, I lose my doubts and fears. Though by the path He leadeth, but one step I may see. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Whenever I am tempted, whenever clouds arise, when song gives way to sighing, when hope within me dies, I draw the closer to Him. From care He sets me free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He cares for me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He cares for me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me.
Thank you, McKale. Thank you so much. McKale is a sophomore going into her junior year in high school. Tyler is a sophomore in college. They are wonderful Christians. They love the Lord. And Kyler has answered God's call to Christian service. And we could not be happier at our house because of that. And I love having you all here today. And McKale, I've waited for this for 75 years. And today it comes to pass. It was beautiful, and thank you. Thank you, Brother Parker, for asking her to sing today. I've thought a lot about what I should preach about today. I'm going to ask your indulgence and do something that I do not do very often. I'm going to preach on the subject, some things I have learned by experience. In doing so, I'm going to share my testimony in a way, and I'm going to weave my sermon into my testimony. So that means a double dose today. That means 2 hours instead of 1 hour. No, I'll rush through it. But I want to preach today about some things I have learned by experience. If you want to study the Apostle Paul's theology, you study the book of Romans or the book of Galatians. For in these books, he shares with us his understanding of theological truths. If you want to study his Christology, magnifying Jesus, the Son of God, as he always did, you would study the book of Colossians or Ephesians. But if you want to study the Apostle Paul himself and hear his personal testimony of what the Lord Jesus did for him, you study the book of Philippians. In this book, he shares his personal experience of his relationship to Christ. And in doing so, he uses the personal pronouns often. He will say I and me and my a lot. I love the book of Philippians for that reason. So in the 4th chapter, he narrows it down a little bit and says within his testimony a word that I want you to see. So turn to the 4th chapter of Philippians and look at verse 11. Philippians 4, verse 11. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Those words really spoke to my heart. The great apostle, God's greatest man, he has been called, shares with us some things he learned by experience. And he says in that 11th verse, I have learned in whatever state I am, therewith to be content. Now, I'd like to add to Paul's word, a word from the Old Testament in the 3rd chapter of Proverbs, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. I've had some great teachers in my 20 years in the classroom. I sat at the feet of Dr. J. Wash Watts, a great Hebrew scholar and former missionary to Israel, and he blessed my life. I sat at the feet of Dr. Frank Stagg in New Orleans Seminary also, and he shared with me New Testament truths that blessed my life. And I learned so much from these men and others like them, for which I will always be grateful. But I have to say to you today, the greatest teacher I have had in these 75 years in the ministry has been a teacher named experience. As much as I learned in the classroom, I learned a lot more out on the church field. Things that have stayed with me and enriched my life and my ministry, experiences and lessons that I have lived over and over again. I thank God for the experiences that he has given me and the lessons that I have learned. Now, when I mention a few of these today, you will say, well, I learned those lessons. I didn't have to go to the seminary. Good for you. But these are my lessons. These are things that I have learned. I share them, not to call attention to myself, but to the wonderful grace of God. For I am what I am by his grace. I will use the personal pronoun a lot. I do not normally do that. I'm not comfortable doing that. But in order to say what I want to say to you today, I will do that. And I hope you won't mind if I say I or me a lot. Some things I have learned by experience. Now, mind you, I can't share with you today all the things I've learned. We'd be here all day and all night and all day tomorrow. But I'm going to share a few of them with you. You also need to know that I'm still learning. I'm 93 years old, but I'm still learning. And I hope to do that until the end. Some of the lessons I've learned have been in the most unusual places and under the most unusual circumstances and with unusual people. When I was interim pastor of the Bluegrass Baptist Church years ago over in Hendersonville, there was a little girl in that church. She must have been 8 or 10 years old. We got acquainted with her family, beautiful family. And this little girl had a difficulty. She did not have full balance. and some learning difficulties. One day her mother came to me at church and she said, "I've got something I want to share with you." She said, "My little daughter wrote this to her friend, her same age. This little friend had the same physical difficulties that she had. And they got acquainted at school. She felt for her little friend, and she wrote her one day a message. How to learn to ride a bicycle. I want you to listen to this and see how the wisdom of it applies to life." Now remember, she's writing to a little girl friend how to learn to ride a bike, but you can take these things and shift them over to life, and they say the same things. Listen to this. Number one, have someone give you a push to get you started. That's not bad. That's good advice. Not only to ride a bicycle, but in life itself. I thank God for people who gave me a push at the right time. Secondly, she said, have someone run alongside of you so you won't fall. I thank God for people who have run alongside me to keep me from falling. Number three, when you're riding, paddle hard. Hard work never hurt anybody. Whatever you do in life, do it with all your heart. Paddle hard. Number four, it's easier going downhill. You don't have to paddle so hard. Thank God for the downhills of life. And finally, when you want to stop a while, push on the brake. And every once in a while, we all need to put on the brake. The wisdom of a little child. I've thought about these things and I've shared them in so many places. A lesson I learned from a little girl who didn't have full balance. When I was pastor of the First Baptist Church of Batesville, Mississippi, one of my deacons was the sheriff of Panola County, James Travis. One day, James came to me after church and he said, "Brother Carl, I have a request. This past week, I locked up a man in jail, and I think he needs to go to the mental institution. But before I can take him, I need 2 responsible citizens to go by and talk to him and sign this form for me. And if you will come over there in the morning, my father will meet you at the jail at 10 o'clock. I said, "I'll be there." So at 10 o'clock, I went over to the jail. Mr. Travis met me there. He was also one of my deacons. James took us into the cell where this man was. I'll never forget it. If I live to be 193, I will never forget this experience. We walked up to his cell, and he was looking out between the bars like this. My job was to talk with him a minute or two so I could say that I had a conversation with him and then sign that form for the sheriff. That's all I had to do. So I decided I would talk to him about the Lord. And I said to him, he's still looking out the bar. I said, "Are you a Christian?" He said, "Yes, sir, I'm a Christian." I said, "Are you sure you are a Christian?" "Yes, sir, I'm a Christian." I said, "Well, don't you know Christians don't fool around and get themselves thrown in jail?" He said, they don't. What about Paul and Silas? As quick as a flash, that's what he said to me. What about Paul and Silas? I said, Sheriff, where is that thing? Let me sign it. I learned a lesson. So come now and let me share with you some things I have learned by experience. And the first is this. I have learned by experience how fast time passes. How soon old age comes. It really has surprised Bonnie and me. Last January, I finished 75 years in the ministry. I can remember the first church I served when I was 18 years old. I can remember walking up and down those roads, visiting those people. I can remember vacation Bible schools and funerals and so much else. I can remember all about those years. And now suddenly, here I am at the sunset. It seems like it has passed so quickly. So what is the lesson? The lesson is, listen to James chapter 4, verse 14, where he says, what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little season and then vanisheth away. Time is fleeting. The years are passing for all of us. Now, the life you have is God's gift to you. What you do with your life in the time you have on this earth is your gift to Him. In the light of all this, remember, what you're going to do with your life, you need to get at it and seriously get it done. The time will soon pass. Don't put off doing the right thing. What you're going to do for God, you need to do it. And it could be that some of you are unsaved. Don't put it off until it's too late. You have a life, you have time, and it all is a gift from God. But it will soon pass. And it won't be long until you'll be my age. And you will be looking back over the years and you will say, my goodness, how quickly it has all gone by. Don't waste the time you have. It is too precious. Give it your best and give God your best. Lesson number 2. I have learned by experience that the best place for a Christian to be is in the center of God's will. Let me say it again. The best place for a Christian to be is in the center of God's will. In the book of Colossians, chapter 1 and verse 9, Paul says, I pray for you, Colossian Christians, that you may know the will of God. And in Ephesians, he said to them, do the will of God with all your heart. Now, I'm sure that I have not always done God's will. And sometimes it has not always been easy for me to know God's will. But I can tell you this. The times that I have known that I was in the will of God, doing the will of God, were the happiest times of my life. So being in the center of God's will is the best place to be. It is the happiest place to be. And it is the safest place to be. And if you will do God's will in your life, God will assume responsibility for how it all turns out. But if you want your will to be done, then you take responsibility for it. Dr. George W. Truett was a great preacher, and he was pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas for 44 years. He was known for a lot of his good sermons, but the main one was his sermon entitled, Thy Will Be Done. If you go to Dallas and go out to the cemetery where Dr. Truett is buried, you go in the main gate and his tomb is the first one you see. And on his tomb are these words, Thy will be done. I pastored in Dallas for 14 years. And it is an interesting thing for me to tell you. The shadow of Dr. George W. Truett still falls over the city of Dallas, though he's been in heaven for years and years and years. He said, and this I want to share with you, to know the will of God is the greatest knowledge. To discover the will of God is the greatest discovery. To do the will of God is the greatest achievement. But to undercut the will of God is the greatest mistake. I have learned by experience that the best place to be is in the center of God's will. I hope you're in the center of His will for your life today. Here's another lesson I've learned. I have learned to be thankful for people who have touched my life and made me a better person. I'm thankful for my friends. People who came into my life at the right time and gave to me gifts that they didn't realize they were giving. I'm sure it's the same with you. My fellow students at Union University and New Orleans Seminary. My professors, fellow preachers, deacons and Sunday school teachers in churches that I've served. Oh, I'm so thankful for people who touched my life and made it better. Be thankful for your friends. And do your best to be a friend. If you have a friend, you'll never be a poor person. You'll always be rich. I could stand here today and talk to you about a lot of people who have made my life better. I thank God for all of them. But I want to tell you about one. When I was a high school student down in Mobile, Alabama, Murphy High School, I was a member of the Ann Street Baptist Church. My Sunday school teacher was a blind man. He never saw my face, but he taught me the Bible. He'd have his wife to read the lesson to him, and then he'd turn it over in that rich heart of his, and then he'd come on Sunday and have us to read a verse, and then he'd share it. Each boy would read a verse, and he would share. About once every 3 or 4 months, I could expect him to come to my house. We'd sit out on the front porch, and he'd talk to me, share with me out of his life and experience. One day in class, he said, "Now you boys are not to feel sorry for me because I'm blind." He said, "I've got an advantage over you. The first time I ever open my eyes and see, I will be looking at the face of Jesus." I'm so thankful for people who touched my life and made it better. For people who are my friends. And some are in this room today. Still listening? I have learned by experience that if you trust Him, God will help you through the hard times of life. This is an experience I don't want anybody else to ever have to go through. But on October the 24th of 1975, my secretary rushed into my office and said, "Brother Carl, you have to take a call right quick." And when I answered the phone, it was the dean of Dallas Baptist University. And the dean said, "Dr. Duck, you and Miss Bonnie need to come to Wrestling Hospital as soon as you can. Reggie has been involved in an accident just off the campus." And I said, "Dean, is it bad?" And he said, "Yes, sir, it is very bad." They took us to Wrestling Hospital and to the chaplain's office. We waited, and it wasn't long until the doctor came and told us that Reggie was dead. I can't tell you how much sorrow we went through. I can't possibly tell you, but some of you have been through the same thing. I can't tell you how deep the hurt still is. But I can tell you this. God did not fail us. He fulfilled every promise that He made. And when we stood at the grave and they were putting his body away, I said to my Bonnie, "Let's be thankful that this is not the end. There's more on the other side." So when the time of hurt comes, and if it hasn't yet, it will, My experience tells me if you will reach up and take the hand of God, He won't fail you. He won't fail you. Folks, you all scare me to death the way you listen at this church. Thank you. Come and let me tell you another one. I have learned by experience that one of life's greatest blessings is a good family. Oh, what a family we had, Barney and Reggie and me. There isn't a blessing that you can possibly have or expect to have greater than having a good family, where there's love and happiness and joy and meaningfulness, and where God lives and faith is real, and where you love one another. The lesson is, give the best you have to give to your family, and it's never in vain. It's always rewarded. When you have a good family, there's a lot of trust. You have a good family, there's a lot of comfort. When you have a good family, there's a lot of meaning. When you have a good family, it may not be good on the outside, but when you come home, it's wonderful. It takes a good marriage to have a good family. And I want to tell you all a secret. You like secrets? Well, this is an open secret. That dear lady sitting right there was born into this world for me. Just for me. And I get up every morning still, after 72 years, surprised that she would marry me. She has been by my side. Next month will be 72 years. And I thank God for my Bonnie, who has been the strength of our family and our home, and my strength, as she has prayed for me and walked by my side. And I remember that happy day when she told me I was going to be a father. What a day. What a day. Don't neglect your children, your grandchildren. Do everything you could possibly do for your family, and it won't be lost. I want to tell you another thing. If you have a good family, you have a good time. We laugh a lot at our house. My Bonnie has the best sense of humor. We laugh a lot at our house. Did you hear that about the old man and woman sitting at the close of the day reading the paper? They couldn't see real well, couldn't hear very well. And Paul finished his half the paper first, and he folded it and put it in his lap, and he looked over at his bride of all those years and thought how wonderful she'd been. And he said, "Ma, I'm proud of you." Well, she folded her half the paper and took off her old specs and looked over at him and said, "Yeah, Paul, and I'm tired of you too." I can say I have learned by experience that one of the greatest blessings in life is a good family. Well, I've got to quit. Oh, I wish I didn't have to quit. But I have to get this in. So hang on to your listening apparatus for just a minute more. I have learned by experience that one of the greatest blessings in this life is leading another person to Jesus Christ. I've had a lot of experiences. A lot of wonderful things have happened to me that I didn't deserve. But I've never had anything as joyful, as meaningful, as happy as leading another person to pray the sinner's prayer and accept the Lord Jesus into their heart. That's the best thing you can do. I've accepted a few awards in my life. My denomination honored me and let me be the president of our Association of Directors organization for 2 years. I've had some wonderful blessings, wonderful things. But I've never experienced anything as wonderful as seeing somebody receive Jesus. When Bonnie and I were in New Orleans Seminary, I pastored the Lion Creek Baptist Church at Kentwood, Louisiana. We stayed there until Reggie was born and finished seminary, and then we went on our journey to 4 other churches along the way. But let me tell you about this. I went back to Lion Creek after a number of years had passed to preach a revival for them. Boy, that was a great time. It was a wonderful time. And one night after the service, I started walking back to the door, and I noticed a little lady sitting right back over in there, and it was obvious that she was crippled. And she raised up her little crippled arm when we made eye contact, and she said, she motioned me over. Well, I went between the pews right in front of where she was sitting, and she reached up with her 2 little crippled arms like this and hugged my neck. And she said, "Brother Carl, do you know who I am?" And I hate for people to ask me that because so often I don't know. And I didn't know who she was until she said, "Do you remember Ms. Robert Martin over on Osaka Highway?" And then it all came down to me. That's that little girl that belonged to Ms. Martin. She said, "Brother Carl, do you remember coming to my house and picking us up in your car and bringing us to Sunday school?" I said, "Yeah, I remember that." And she said, "You remember when it was raining, you'd take me in your arms from the porch and put me in the car?" Because she couldn't walk very well. I said, "Yeah, I remember that." And I said, "Not only that, I remember the night I baptized you." She said, "You do?" I said, "Yeah, I do." I remember Brother Lucas Simmons went down the baptistry with me to help me baptize you so I wouldn't drown you because she was crippled. She said, "Brother Carl, I teach the ladies' Sunday school class. And you see the ramp out front? The deacons built that just for me so I could bring my wheelchair in church." She said, "You remember that day you came to the house and led me to Jesus?" And somehow, folks, I remembered. It all came back to me. And I said, "Yes, I do. I remember." She said, "I love the Lord, Brother Carl, and I have ever since that day. And I teach that class every Sunday." She said, "Bend down here." And I bent down, and she took her little arms again and wrapped them around my neck and kissed me right there. And she said, "Brother Carl, I thank you for caring about a little crippled girl and telling me about Jesus. I've learned by experience that the greatest thing you can do is lead another person to the Lord. Well, I've got to quit now for sure. But I'll close with this. I've learned by experience that the longer you serve the Lord, the sweeter he grows. And Dr. Truitt, that I referred to a minute ago, also said, toward the end of his life, if I had 1,000 lives, I'd give them all to serve the Lord. And that's my testimony to you today. I don't have but one, but if I had 1,000, I would want to give them to the Lord's service. I hope you don't mind that I've shared my testimony with you today. And I hope that maybe in doing so, that it would be a blessing to you. Thanks for listening.